Hello and welcome to our first presentation, our first PowerPoint and lecture, The Collision of Cultures. We are really going to be discussing early North American history in this PowerPoint, just to kind of set the ground of what is happening on this continent before the European invasion in the late 15th century. All right, so let's continue on. So, it really was known, very popular opinion up until maybe a decade ago, that Christopher Columbus discovered North America, which actually is not true. And before we talk about that, we need to back up and really look at the discovery of America that began thousands of years earlier. And this is going to be when human beings are going to first cross over from the more western continents and came over to North America on the Bering Strait, which is really what we believe how people migrated over here some 11,000 years ago. Now, the Bering Strait is what now is Alaska. I mean, if you look at this slide, you can kind of see it, but not too much. So if you go to the next slide, this is a photograph from NASA during winter. You can see, actually, that's ice that just forms of what we hypothesized what the Bering Strait would have looked like. It's really cool that it's still those currents and just how the Earth is, just how chunks of ice that could be used as land still form within that area to really give us a really great picture of what it was like for these Clovis people, which are people from modern day Siberia, came over from Siberia, from Russia, and then came over. And so let's go ahead and talk about the Clovis people. Now, this is around the time of during the Archaic period, which roughly refers to early human history in America, beginning around 8000 BC. Now, as this period went on, population groups are going to increase. Groups are going to start to expand their activities. They're going to develop new tools such as nets and hooks, and later on some groups are going to begin farming and creating settlements in the process. And so these groups, these individuals are no longer going to be nomadic, meaning that they stay in one place for a short amount of time, maybe 6 months, maybe a few years. But when they start farming, this is when you really start to see settlements. And this is really cool for archaeologists, because you begin to see evidence of these peoples. Now, to know my background a little bit more, my undergrad is in archaeology and my master's is in history. And so I try to bring in both components when I teach, whether it's in person or online. And so, yeah, it's just really cool to see evidence of these settlements. And so, moving on to that, we're going to start to look at different groups, different people groups, different cultures within the Western Hemisphere. We're going to look at a little bit within South America, Mesoamerica, and within North America, because that's where primarily we are going to be focused. So let's go ahead and let's look at those people groups. So Old World empires. The first group that I want to really focus on are the Incas. Now, the Incas are going to be in Peru. And Peru, as you can see in the far right picture, is really 2,000 miles that stretch along the western portion of South America. Now, when you look at the Inca Empire, they're really characterized by two things, two elements. A complex administrative system, and they're also going to have a network of paved roads that are going to wield together all their population of multiple tribes into underneath a single government. It's pretty awesome to see. And so those are the two elements that I want you to know about the Incas. Now, when you look at the Olmec period, or the Olmec people, I should say, they are going to be organized societies of Mesoamericans, which are going to emerge around 10,000 BC. Now, when you think of the Olmec people, I'm sure you've seen pictures of those really large human head statues that have been unearthed that are beautiful. Those are the Olmec people. Those heads, those stone groups, they weren't sculpted. They were actually like carved, and they're beautiful and they're flawless. And so this civilization is going to be in present-day Mexico and much of Central America. Now, lastly, when we look at this area, the last group we're really going to look at, well, there's really two. We're going to look at the Mayans, and then we're going to look at the Aztecs. So the Mayans are going to emerge around 800 AD in parts of Central America and the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. And the Mayans are fascinating. I love studying about the Mayans. They are going to develop a written language, a numerical system similar to Arabic, an accurate calendar, an advanced agricultural system, and they're going to have important trade routes into other areas of the continent. Really, really exciting to look at the Mayans. And the other group, as I've already said, is going to be the Aztecs. So let's look at the Aztecs. Now, the Aztecs are also known as the Mexica. So if you see those two terms being changed out, they are the same people. So the Mayan societies are going to be taken over by other Mesoamerican tribes, the Mexica or the Aztecs. And so in 1300 AD, the Mexica is going to build the city of Tenochtitlan, which is going to be present-day Mexico City. And by 1500 AD, so only 200 years when the Aztecs were really a collective group of people, they're going to have roughly 100,000 people. They're going to have public schools. Now, those are strictly for male children, but still they have a public school system, an organized military, a medical system, and a slave workforce from conquered tribes. So these are really the four tribes within Mesoamerica or Central America and South America that I wanted to focus on. Now we're going to kind of switch gears and we're going to look at the tribes of the north. So the first group I want to talk about, the Eskimo or the Inuit of the Arctic Circle. So the Eskimos are going to fish and they're going to hunt seals. They are big game hunters of the northern forest. They're going to lead nomadic lives based on the pursuit of moose and caribou. Now there's going to be other tribes that are up north, not that far north, but looking more at the Pacific Northwest. Those tribes are going to focus more on fishing for salmon. They're going to start to create permanent settlements along the coast. While if you go to the Southwest, they're going to be more focused on agriculture. So they're going to build irrigation systems and they're going to construct towns of stone and adobe, those red clay mud houses that you typically see within the Southwest, within Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, but really it's New Mexico and Arizona. That portion is really, when I talk about the Southwest, that's what I'm referring to. And then the last tribe are going to be the woodland Native Americans, which is going to be comprised of 1/3 of North America are just woodland Indians. And they are comprised, not really comprised, but they tend to focus on farming, hunting, gathering, and fishing. And so the South are going to have permanent settlements with large trading networks based on corn and other grains grown in rich lands of the Mississippi Valley. And I wanted to mention them just simply because when you look at the evidence prior to European expansion, European involvement, within North America, these are the tribes that you're going to come in contact with. For example, I didn't grow up, but I went to college and grad school in Pensacola. And so when I was there, if you went on I-10 to Alabama, you'd see these big hills, which if you lived there for a while, you notice that that's not part of the environment. That's not natural. And so a lot of those hills are known to be funeral mounds, Native American funeral mounds. If you just see these big out of the blue hills, more than likely that's what they are. It's pretty awesome to put that into perspective. I kind of mentioned this early on, but so when we talk about Christopher Columbus, a lot of people give him credit for discovering North America, which actually is not true. Christopher Columbus never actually set foot on North America. He landed in the Bahamas. But prior to that is you're going to have two other people groups. You're going to have more Leif Erikson, which is more, he was Northern European. And then you're also going to have the Chinese are actually going to come really close to discovering North America. But none of them created, but the reason why we don't really give these two other people groups credit is because they never created permanent settlements. They came here for a very small amount of time if they touched the soil, but they didn't stay, that they went back to their countries. Really, it was the Spanish who were the first to do that, to conquer this land and remain here. And so that's why we tend to give them first credit. So as we look at Europe, why did they choose to go westward? There's various reasons of why they did. And there's really two of them: the growth of the population in the 15th century and the emergence of new governments that are more united and powerful than in the past. Now remember, earlier in the 14th century, you have Marco Polo, who had traveled back from Asia with spices, with cloths and dyes. And so Europeans were thinking of how to find a shorter route to Asia because these entities were very popular and making a lot of money. And so the Europeans wanted to tap into this market. And when I say the unification of countries, you have the unifying of Great Britain with King James I of England. That's more around Jamestown, so that's more 1600s. Even prior to that, you have Queen Elizabeth, who is just the Queen of England. England and Scotland are not united yet. But in the 1490s within Spain, that is when Spain becomes the Spain we think of as one unified country, because Spain is historically known up until the late 15th century are multiple kingdoms. And it's not until the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella where they unite together to overcome the last remaining kingdom of Spain. So let's go ahead and let's focus on Spain. So Christopher Columbus, who is Italian, is going to sail for the Spanish crown. In 1492, he's going to have 3 voyages. And the first one is going to be in 1492, which is when he sails with the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria for Spain. He thought he had reached India. He had no idea that he actually landed on a group of islands, and then a large continent after the islands would be there, because he never set foot on North America. And so that's why he names the people he comes into contact with Indians, because he thinks he has landed in India. Now, Spain is going to claim the whole New World for themselves, and they're going to eventually have a line drawn to where, which went to present-day Brazil. Which is present-day Brazil, went to Portugal. Portugal and Spain are really, really involved within. So when you look at the early times of exploration, the Spanish and the Portuguese are really the ones that are investing within Mesoamerica and South America. When you look at North America, yes, the Spanish are there heavily, but that is where you have more Northern Europeans, the English, the French, the Dutch. And if you look at explorers, it's interesting. Countries tend to create colonies within places that their environment resembles their home. For example, Newfoundland, which is extremely far north, the temperature there is very similar to England and to France and to those countries. So let's continue, and we're going to look at Spanish explorers. Here is the map I told you about. This is really prior to Christopher Columbus. As you can see the date on the map, Spain, 1212 to 1492. So this is really before they start exploring. Here we go, Spanish explorers. So let's focus on that. The picture on the far left, of course, is Christopher Columbus, who we've already discussed. But the two other pictures we're going to briefly talk about now. So the picture in the center is Hernando Cortez. Hernando Cortez is simply known for wiping out the Aztecs unintentionally with smallpox. He is very interested in gold and with silver. And the gentleman on the far right is going to be Francisco Pizarro, and he is known for conquering the Aztecs. Now, many of the reasons why these gentlemen and the Spanish are known for overcoming these large Native American populations unintentionally at first is simply because of disease. That's how they wiped out these individuals. At first it was an accident, and then once they realized that these native peoples had never been subjected to European diseases, then it was kind of created into a weapon later on. But initially they had no idea why millions of people were dying, suffering from a disease that Europeans hadn't suffered from in a very, very long time. Now, when you talk about the Spanish, you also have to realize that their motives for exploring was not only about gold and silver, but about spreading Christianity. Ferdinand and Isabella were very devout Catholics. And so they're just going to start to really invest within this new world with the creation of St. Augustine in 1565, which is going to be the first permanent settlement in the U.S. Pensacola, which is more like a military port for the Spanish. It's not, they don't have people there consistently, but Pensacola and St. Augustine to this day continue to go back of which one is the oldest, which one has had people there consistently. Santa Fe was also established in 1609. Now I did briefly talk about the biological exchanges with looking at disease, but there's also going to be really great cultural exchanges between these two people groups as well. And before we talk about those, I love this map. You'll see within my PowerPoints, I tend to put a lot of maps and pictures because I'm more of a visual learner, and I'm thinking some of you are as well. So this map is really great because it outlines the different voyages from the different Spanish explorers, or European explorers, I should say. Between 1492 and 1522, you have Christopher Columbus in the yellow, Ferdinand Magellan, John Cabot, and Vasco da Gama. So I love this just because it really just shows you just how much we Europeans, Northern Europeans, are exploring and gathering data and information on a topic that has never previously been done. It's a very exciting time. So we're going to talk about disease, and we briefly talked about that some populations are going to be wiped out because of disease, initially by accident. And these diseases include influenza, smallpox, measles, and typhus. Now, when you look at the Native Americans, a lot of them are going to be viewed by Europeans. The Native American population will be viewed by Europeans as savages, and they're going to take measures to brutally wipe them out to gather their resources, their gold, their silver, their land. And so by the 1540s, there's going to be a combined effort of military efforts and biological exchanges to wipe out all of Mexico and all of South American empires, those empires we just talked about. Now, there are some really great cultural exchanges at the same time. One of those exchanges is the exchanges of food. Europeans are going to exchange sugar and bananas, domestic livestock, and the horse with the Native Americans, while the Native Americans are going to exchange their methods of agricultural techniques to the demands of the land and new food. Meaning Europeans, yes, did know agriculture and how to farm, but this is a completely different continent, completely different soil, different environment, and they have never grown food on. And so Native Americans are going to teach these Europeans how to grow corn, squash, pumpkins, beans, sweet potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, and potatoes. Now, the Native Americans and the Spanish are also going to exchange languages, and they're going to start to intermarry and exchange cultures as well. And now that is where you start to see the really development of a whole new social class, multiple social classes, social terms. And this is where it just gets complicated for the Spanish because they are trying to create a intercultural exchange with the Native Americans, but they are very brutal with their relationships with the Native Americans. They really want to make them into Europeans. They're not really so into preserving their culture. They, meaning the Native Americans, they really want to influence them to come up to the Spaniards' level of intellect, of dress, of language, because they're very arrogant and they're very persistent that their way is better than the Native Americans. And as we've seen from the last 20 minutes of discussing this topic, these Native American groups were extremely intellectual. They had devised governments and constitutions and roads and trade and money and just they're very smart and they're very put well together. But they did not look like the Europeans, so the Europeans saw them as beneath them, which is really going to be really hurtful to both sides. So we've talked a lot about the Spanish. Now what we're going to do is focus on the English, or introduce the English, I should say. So when you look at the English, we have to examine, well, why would the English want to explore the New World or attempt to explore the New World? So let's focus our attention at looking at England, because there's really some social and economic problems that are really going to push England to exploration. So if you look at England, wool is going to be in very high demand. And so landowners are going to start converting their land from fields with crops and lots of people working those lands to pastures for sheep where you don't really need any employees. You don't really need anyone to work for you. And so land is going to be very expensive. There's not as many jobs. And so land is going to be very expensive, and England's food supply is going, and well, rather the need of having a food supply is going to increase more and more and more. And so during this time, you also have this term called mercantilism. 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 And this is going to rest on the belief that one person or nation could grow rich only at the expense of another, and that a nation's economic health depended on selling as much as possible to foreign lands and buying as little as possible from them. So this really we see prevalent within this time frame. And at the same time, you're going to have the Protestant Reformation, which is going to start around 1517. Now in 1517, Martin Luther, who was in Germany, is going to challenge some of the most basic principles and beliefs of the Roman Catholic Church. And at the same time, you're going to have John Calvin reject the Catholic belief that human behavior could affect an individual's prospects for salvation. He's going to introduce the doctrine of predestination, that God elected some people to be saved and condemned others. And at the same time, you're going to have King Henry of England establish the Church of England simply because he wants to divorce his wife, Catherine, who he's been married to for 20 years, has had multiple stillborn children with, and has a daughter with Mary, Princess Mary at this time. And the Pope would not agree to annul the marriage or agree to the divorce, of course. And so he leaves the Catholic Church, which is very interesting because prior to that, he was kind of known as the savior of the Christian Church, of how influential he was within the Catholic beliefs. Very interesting if you ever study about King Henry. So Puritans, also called separatists, are going to leave for religious freedom after the death of Queen Elizabeth, King Henry's second daughter. King James I, who is Queen Elizabeth's nephew, I believe, is going to come into the throne, and he is Catholic. But King James I, he is the first James, royalty speaking, within England, but he also has royalty in his blood when it came to the Scottish throne. So through him coming to the throne, it unites Scotland and England together to what we know now as Great Britain. However, James is going to place illegal and arbitrary taxation on the separatists, favoring the Catholics within his new formed country. Easily enough. As we go through these pictures, I want to show you various players. So this is a picture of the Protestant Reformation in the 16th and 17th centuries. And I wanted to show you this because the really big red circles show you the hubs of Protestant universities. The blue shows you territories that remain Catholic. Orange, of course, the territories that are now Protestant. And green is kind of a mix in between the two. So you have King Henry here. You have Queen Mary, whose mother was Henry's first wife, Catherine. So she's Catholic. She marries Philip of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella's son. Queen Elizabeth, her mother was Anne Boleyn, who was beheaded, who was Henry's second wife, and she is Protestant, but she really wants to care for all of her subjects, Catholic and Protestant alike, which is very shocking to her subjects, that she would think of looking out for everyone's well-being. And then here is James I. So when I speak about James, this is who we're speaking of. When we speak about Jamestown, this is who we're speaking about. So now that we've really introduced the English, I want to mention a little bit about the French as well. Oh, here we go. Here's the family tree of Henry. So let's briefly introduce the French and the Dutch. So the French are going to form Quebec in 1608. Now the French are going to create close ties with the Native Americans. Now the French are really great at creating relationships with the Native Americans. The French fur trade is going to become one of the staples of the French colonial economy. The traders lived with the Native Americans. They're going to marry Native women. They're going to move into their culture. They're not going to try to make them French women, French children, French society like the English and the Spanish will do. The fur trade is going to open the way for French agricultural estates and for the development of trade and military centers in Quebec and Montreal. And lastly, I want to talk about is the Dutch. Now, the Dutch are going to really be focused within New England, particularly when you look at Manhattan. They're going to build a town, which they're going to name Manhattan Island in 1609. And in 1624, the Dutch West India Company is going to establish a series of trading posts along the Hudson, the Delaware, and the Connecticut rivers. Now, it's very important to realize that all of these settlements and all of these developments are very important, and they're all situated along rivers, which historically has been done for thousands of years. Even if you look at Egypt and the Nile with the pharaohs, they're always near waterways because water is life. That's how you grow your food. That's how you stay hydrated. And so as we continue to look at these topics, this overarching theme that we're really going to be examining, keep that in the back of your mind, and that we're looking for this overarching picture adding to the large narrative of this beginnings of American history, and just how these relationships are going to form and develop over the coming decades and centuries, which are very important, very important.